Have your Christian friends been acting a little weird lately? Are you wondering why? Is there anything that you can do to help them to get through all of this? And most importantly, what do you do if by chance they're right and this is it? We'll talk about that next. But first, as always, we start with our mission.
With firm faith, I believe and profess everything that the Catholic Church teaches. But for many reasons, the fullness of that message hasn't been getting out lately. What if we, together, set out to learn the faith, to live the faith, and to share this faith, like missionaries of old? What would the world look like in 100 years?
Okay, I think we can all agree that the world is a little crazy right now, and sure, many people, including myself, are going a little overboard with all this stuff. Maybe we're all a little nuts right now. But I thought I would make a short video with a few tips that might help all of you understand why many of your Christian friends might be acting a little crazy right now, and what you can do if by some crazy chance we're all correct and this really is the end of the world as we know it. Now, hopefully it's not, because as many of you know, I'm a Dolphins fan, and we've had a pretty rough 20 years or so, and we just drafted a very talented quarterback for the first time since Dan Marino retired over 20 years ago. So part of me really hopes that this isn't the end. Part of me really hopes that we're about to win the first Super Bowl in my lifetime. But just in case, here are 7 tips for atheists if this is the end of the world as we know it. But first, why are Christians all of a sudden talking about the end of the world? Well, life has dramatically changed in the last 2 months. We're all living through experiences that pretty much have never happened before, at least not like this anyways. There is admittedly a lot of crazy stuff going on, and it may be a crazy coincidence, but a lot of this stuff seems awfully similar to a bunch of end-of-the-world prophecies that we've been reading in our Bibles for our whole lives. It's probably just a coincidence, but nevertheless, that's why we're all a little on edge. So here is tip number 1. When Christians speak about the end of the world, they don't necessarily mean the big... Sometimes they mean just the end of a culture or the end of an age, like the fall of Jerusalem or the fall of the Roman Empire or even the French Revolution. And in some rare cases, these cultural upheavals may actually be good for society as a whole. I guess depending on your point of view, of course. But anyways, tip number 2, everything has a purpose. What I mean is, if God does exist, we'll get to that at the end of the video. If he does exist and he created all of this, then it's reasonable to assume that he did all of this for some reason, for a purpose. It would be absurd to think that God created something so beautiful and so elaborate without having a purpose in mind. So if there is a reason, whatever that reason is, I suppose different religions would debate whatever that reason might be, but nevertheless, eventually, that final end, that final purpose will arrive, kind of like a kid waiting for Christmas morning. Eventually, it's going to get here. Christians, in particular, call this day Judgment Day, which brings us to tip number 3. It's reasonable to assume that Judgment Day is going to be a little intense, and that intensity could reasonably take 2 different forms. For some, it may be an amazing experience, while for others, it might be a terrifying experience. For example, many of you knew that I grew up without a father, and no one taught me how to catch a baseball. So my mother thought it would be a good idea to sign me up for Little League. Now, for me, every practice was a terrifying experience because I couldn't catch a baseball. You think someone would have noticed and taught me, but no. They just kept throwing baseballs at me. Sink or swim. I got hit in the face with baseballs more times than I can count. So if you're watching this and wondering if I ever got hit in the head when I was a kid, the answer is yes. Now, while I'm experiencing all of this trauma, all of the other kids who knew how to catch, they were having a blast. They liked baseball. I thought it was terrifying. Just a side note here, religion isn't about being perfect. Practicing a religion, you might say, is like learning to catch a baseball. It's preparation for the intensity of the big day. Which brings us to tip number 4. On Judgment Day, God isn't sending you to hell. God doesn't send anyone to hell. It's a huge misconception, and I'm here to clarify it. All of this stuff, all of it, religion, morality, ethics, all of it, it is literally about free will and free choice. We have freedom to choose for or against the good, for or against the true, for or against God. All of you philosophy majors out there are very well aware that modern philosophers have done a hack job on the concept of free will and free choice, of cause in general. And everything that we know in modern society is a result of their malicious experiment. So Judgment Day is not so much about a vengeful God that's punishing you, but more about a loving God honoring the free choices that you have made in complete freedom. If you go to hell, it's by your choice. And unfortunately, it seems many people want to make that choice. Which brings us to tip number 5. Our society has totally mixed up the idea of freedom and the idea of license. They're not the same thing. We say things like, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. That's not freedom. That's license. And doing whatever you want, that actually leads into slavery, not freedom. For example, if I do too much of this or too much of that, chocolate donuts are a perfect example, I end up addicted to the sugar or the chocolate or the donuts. And I find I have a very difficult time walking away from a box of donuts. I'm speaking from experience. My lack of self-control when it comes to a box of donuts does not represent my freedom. It represents a lifelong dependency, a slavery, so to speak, to something that is really bad for me. I got these donuts to demonstrate this point. They didn't even make it through the sound check. I ate every last one of them. This box is empty. This isn't the idea of freedom. The Christian idea of freedom is that I fulfill my nature, that what it means to be human, fully. Think of an eagle that is soaring high in the sky. That is what it means to be free. This point is made abundantly clear to me every time I drive through this neighborhood and I see some dude 30 years older than me running up that hill. I have a hard time just walking from here to the refrigerator to get more pastries. Maybe this differentiation has not been well articulated in modern society, but this is the schema behind all of the controversial debates of ethics that we've been having in this country for the last 40 or 50 years. Think of all the stuff that we are addicted to or dependent upon that started with us demanding our freedom or our rights. Which brings us to tip number 6. Perhaps this is the one you were all waiting for. I think that it's more reasonable to believe that God exists than to believe that he doesn't. Oftentimes, Christians are challenged to provide empirical evidence that God exists. And since we cannot, the easy conclusion to draw is that God does not exist. However, there is a flaw in the argument. If I ask you to demonstrate that circles exist by showing me a square circle, your inability to do so would not be proof that circles do not exist. It would only be proof that the law of non-contradiction does. I am not a materialist. Therefore, I do not believe that everything in creation can be explained by its material parts. There are too many examples in nature in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Modern society has bought into this lie, the lie of materialism, that everything can be explained by its material parts and the sequence in which those parts are arranged. These parts arranged in this way produce a baseball. These parts arranged in this way produce donuts. While this ideology can explain the baseball or the donuts, I'm absolutely skeptical that it explains everything. And I'm going to guess that you are as well, because at this very video that you're watching, it likely was preceded by an ad in which some dude told you that he has figured out the proper formula for getting rich, for losing weight. All you have to do is just follow his secret formula. But it seems that you didn't click on that ad because you're here, not there. It seems that you too are a little skeptical of materialism. Why are we skeptical? Because we all know from our experience that very, very young man who is trying to get rich from the ad does not have the life experience to determine the secret of success. He hasn't failed enough in order to succeed. In other words, we know from our real world experience that the sum is greater than its parts. When bank robbers are captured, they are prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated. However, if there was ever a case in which a dog were able to successfully rob a bank, now this may go into left field for a minute, but I promise to tie it all together at the end, so stay with me here. Think of a scenario in which a dog walks into a bank. He has a device strapped to his waist and a note in his mouth, and he escapes with a bag of money. 3 hours later, the dog is apprehended at a nearby park. Is there any DA in existence who would prosecute the dog? I think it's more likely that investigators would seek the dog's owner, and the dog's owner would be prosecuted for training the dog to commit a crime. But how can we quantify this difference? There are no material parts in the human or in the dog that can account for this injustice. The dog did the crime, the owner was at home playing video games. And since both creatures have nearly identical biological material, perhaps a monkey would be a better example. But whatever, you get my point. Empirically, this is an injustice. That guy is innocent. A traditional philosopher would solve this problem by categorizing both creatures, the human and the dog, as animals, yes. However, the dog would be categorized as a brute animal, while the human will be categorized as a rational animal. This distinction is important because it is the explanation that we're looking for, the evidence that something exists in creation that is not material, but is rational. The sum is greater than its parts. The human is rational. He cannot be explained solely by his material makeup. He is a rational animal, and it's no coincidence that rationality corresponds directly to what we already spoke about: freedom, the free will, and free choice. Those things will have a dramatic importance for each of us on Judgment Day. No one believes that on Judgment Day the dog will be judged guilty for his actions. Now, we can see clearly this differentiation, and therefore we can create a kind of hierarchy in creation in which there are living things that are material but not rational, like plants, dogs, and primates. Then, just above them, we can see us humans, things that are material and rational. It is reasonable, following the pattern, to look for something else in that hierarchy, that something that would occupy that empty space, something that is not material but is rational, completing the pattern. This pattern is not arbitrary. We can observe it in its existence in nature, and this will be very important at the conclusion of this video. We see that the information in creation, the data of our world, that stuff that scientists study, they extract the information from the existing world, from plants, from rocks, from brain matter, and they study it under microscopes, telescopes, This data corresponds to this distinction. On the bottom level of the hierarchy, we see physical material like rocks, donuts, clouds. On the next level of the hierarchy, we can make abstractions about the physical material: hard rock, white cloud, 5 donuts, empty box. On the next level above that, we can make pure abstractions that are separated entirely from the physical matter: justice, love, freedom, beauty, gluttony. Therefore, following this observable pattern, it's reasonable to conclude that something exists that's not material. Therefore, I am not a materialist. I don't think it is reasonable to assume that the only thing that exists is physical material, just because it's the only thing that can be measured with other material objects like microscopes or telescopes. I see reasonable evidence of other things in creation that encourages me to believe that spiritual things exist. Now for tip number 7, let's put everything together. First, if you are a materialist and I was unable to change your mind with the bank robbing dog, that's okay. We can still be friends and all, so don't worry. Don't worry about all this crazy stuff going on. I'm sure everything will get back to normal soon enough. Now, if this is the end of the world as we know it, remember, I hope not, this is Miami's year. God's had 2,000 years to come back. Does he really need to come back right now? But if he does, it's fair to assume that it's going to be pretty intense, for better or for worse. And it might be a good idea to prepare for that intensity. Religion is not the oppressive means to control you. It's not supposed to be anyways. It's supposed to be the habitual preparation for that intensity. Now, of all of the religions in the world that you could freely choose from in order to prepare yourself, which one is the right one to prepare yourself for the intensity of Judgment Day? Based on what we've established, we spoke about the nature of spirituality being pure rationality. Now, of all of the religions in the world, are there any that teach the existence of a being whose essence is pure rationality? I'm not sure. If there is, then perhaps it might be a good idea to consider making a free will choice. That means that we rationally recognize the goodness of something, and because it is truly good, we freely choose to love it, and to reject any attachment or harmful addiction or behaviors that could contradict that truth and goodness. In other words, to literally put into practice the virtues and exercises of that religion. Because if I don't practice, I might get hit in the head with another baseball. So, look for more guides to the end of the world coming soon. In the meantime, I believe that there is no better way to prepare for that time, whenever that time is, than meditating upon the life, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ in the Holy Rosary. To watch the last video, click here. And remember, if we learn the faith, if we live the faith, and if we share the faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission. FYI, that thumbnail was completely photoshopped. No frogs were harmed in the making of this video. Now, have we witnessed the emergence of a new world order?